All right, it is 4:05, and we should get started. And it's mainly Molly, but that's all right. Well, yes, thank you for being here. So we're gonna talk today about the report of non-university activities and conflicts of interest and conflicts of commitment. And as you can see, you might recall that the abbreviation for report of non-university activities is called RNUA. So advance, it's not advancing. Okay, so here is just an outline. There is a lot to cover, but this is just kind of a general overview. Just gonna present the general and key areas to focus on as approvers. A couple of weeks ago, we gave a workshop on how to complete an RNUA for disclosures. And as you know, this time is just focused on approvers. So here is an outline. So we're gonna briefly talk about what is the RNUA, who should complete the disclosure, what should be disclosed, why is it important, and towards the end of the presentation, I'll focus on the responsibilities of the unit executive officers. So the RNUA is a process where faculty and academic professionals need to disclose and obtain prior approval to conduct any outside activities. And we'll touch on which type of outside activities in a minute, but as we know, this is required by a university policy that has been established at the system level. So an important purpose of this policy is to provide a framework to identify and either eliminate or manage actual or perceived conflicts of commitment of interest. We understand that faculty and staff engage in a variety of activities, and the purpose of this policy is not to prevent them from engaging in those activities, but kind of to see a mechanism, find a mechanism to do it in a way where it obtains prior approval, and in some cases when there might be a little bit of concern due to a conflict of commitment of interest, then in those cases, a management plan can be established. In the 4 years I have been in my current position, I have never seen any kind of denial of any of those activities. So it just kind of shows that, yeah, we're here to support faculty and to ensure that the proper procedures are followed. So the next question is, who should complete the RNUA? So as reviewers, you should focus on the following, probably just the staff and your unit, and includes, here's the list. I'm not gonna go over the list, but you can see that the list that includes something also to keep in mind that I think in previous versions of the policy was not included is the hourly faculty and also individuals with 0% appointments. So what should be disclosed? So to answer this question, we need to touch on what are conflicts of commitment and conflicts of interest. And it could be actual conflicts, potential conflicts, or perceived conflicts. So let's start with the conflicts of commitment. So a conflict of commitment, as you can see here, is when what we call covered individual, the list that we saw in the previous slide, engages in outside activities that appear to interfere with the university responsibilities. And so the conflict of commitment is kind of relatively easy to identify. And here are, like, for example, if you can see that an individual is not conducting their university responsibilities, that might be a potential reason is that they might be engaged in another activity. We had a case where a faculty was not teaching the class. It was an online class, and the students were commenting that the faculty haven't been there for about a month. Which also relates to the next area, a section here. So we were actually noticing a performance issue. So those were kind of, in a way, indicators that something was going on. And here you see that another way to identify the conflict of commitment is whether the individual is basically spending time because it's engaged with maybe a job in another institution. And the case I was mentioning before, we found out that the individual was actually working for another institution. So basically was also teaching in another institution. So there was the conflict of commitment there became obvious after we engaged in a conversation with this individual. Now let's talk about conflict of interest. Conflict of interest comes in various ways. One of them is when we as UI employees engage in activities that might influence our judgment, and that in a way they cause some kind of detriment for the institution. That's an instance. Another one is if we're in a position to, as you can see here, influence university business, research, or any other activities that could lead in personal gain, and not only of the covered individual, but also of the immediate family members of covered individuals. So for example, if let's say one of my family members is has, let's say, a catering business that is kind of working with the university to provide services. And so we were to get that contract, and that, in this case, hypothetical case, my immediate family member would benefit. And well, that's why this kind of relates to what I just talked about, that like one of the covered individuals is trying to engage in some kind of vendor on contracting relationship with the university. And as you can see here is whether there is financial or ownership interest. There is also, we need to keep in mind that when we engage in this type of activities. And here are some examples of a common conflict of interest situations. We have cases of like startup companies. As you can see here, a lot of the examples, maybe providing some kind of service to the university, some kind of product. For example, let's say if I have developed a company that is going to sell, I don't know, let's say glassware for the cafeteria. So that's a potential conflict of interest there. Or sponsoring research for the covered individual. If, for example, I were to engage in Sigma, like there's a Sigma is a chemical company, and a Sigma is kind of sponsoring my research, and he could be a perceived conflict of interest. So it's a matter of, as we'll see, it's a matter of clarifying and putting a contract in place that includes all the details of what is happening in that sponsoring relationship. Another conflict of interest is using university resources for kind of personal gain of families, of family members' benefit. Let's say if I were to start photocopying or making photocopies using university resources to promote a business, or to promote a family member's business, or using the space to organize, I don't know, potential donors for my business. So that would be another example of a conflict of interest. And also we see cases where using university students or staff to contribute to like a personal business could also be a conflict of interest. And here you can see consulting relationships, those are also a possibility, and even serving in a fiduciary role within an organization. So this is related to the previous list, but it's kind of more examples is how can I recognize whether a conflict of interest is occurring. So here you can see you need to ask whether is the covered individual in a position to direct the work or staff or students to the benefit of their outside activity. Again, if I kind of have my students and then said, okay, so you guys need to work X number of hours promoting my business, that would be conflict of interest. Or maybe here, what I was telling you earlier, acting on behalf of the university and on behalf of another entity for the same transaction. Here could be an example. Let's say that I'm trying to negotiate a contract, but the contract is with my own company, so that obviously that's a conflict of interest. We talked about this earlier. If the covered individual is a position that's using university resources but is benefiting an outside organization, and also if someone is in a position to make decisions on behalf of the university, but the result of those decisions could benefit the covered individual or someone in their immediate family. That also would be a conflict of interest. All right, so now why is it important to complete that? So this is a mechanism by which we are kind of allowing all the covered individuals to conduct those outside activities. But something important to remember here is that they have to request prior approval. And they have to also disclose what is going on, what activities a covered individual is engaged in. And updates might be needed, like for example, at the beginning of this time of the year, when we required disclosure, maybe in the spring semester, somebody engaged with another company or a different activity, they have to update the disclosure and include that new activity. And the importance of this process is that there is a documentation that the particular case was reviewed, was approved, and in some cases where there is the perceived or actual conflict, then in those cases, there is a management plan that is put into place to basically to comply with our university policy. When do we need to complete these disclosures? Each fall, and also for new staff, people, faculty, they have to complete it within 30 days after they join the university. And as I mentioned earlier, before engaging in another activity, they have to complete or update their RNUA. And any time that the activity changes and the individuals are engaging in outside activities, then that an RNUA has to be completed. Now, what are the responsibilities of the unit executive officers? Well, they have to review all the approvals, the request for approval for those outside activities. They have to, of course, to assess whether it is actually a conflict of commitment or conflict of interest. And in those cases where it is, then the unit executive officer needs to work with the covered individuals to develop a management plan, or in some cases, eliminate the conflict. So in doing so, going through this process, the unit executive officer might ask for more information, just to kind of request clarification about what is happening in the individual's outside activities. And after the executive officer reviews all the information available, then it must make a determination on whether the request was approved or not. And here's something to keep in mind is that this notification has to be done within, here just give a regular time frame is 14 calendar days. So as when we have a disclosure and someone saying that they're spending time in an outside activity, we need to take into account the amount of time that the individual is spending in that activity. And as a general guideline, 1 day per week is in general considered not a conflict of commitment. And 1 day per week is not kind of strictly defined. It's not defined as like an 8 hour shift, considering that faculty and academic staff spend long days. It just can be considered perhaps up to 12 hours. So it's just kind of loosely applied. In some cases, when the potential conflict is because they are spending too much time, or potentially they're proposing to spend a significant amount of time in that external activity, then the unit executive officer may require the individual to reduce the appointment. Like, for example, in some cases, if there's a staff member that is going to be spending a significant amount of time on an external project, that person may need to reduce the appointment at the university, or in some cases, there are leave requests. But in any case, so this is a process where the individual and the unit executive officer work together and discuss the situation and try to come up with a plan where the number of days spent is acceptable. And in several cases, then a management plan is put into place. So something to keep in mind here as we are kind of documenting what is happening with this approval process is making sure that there is specific information in terms of, okay, how many days per week are going to be spent on this external activity and when it's going to take place. And also, if we can indicate when the activity is going to start and when it's going to end. Now, regarding the use of university resources, we need to be careful when engaging in external activities, particularly when there is intellectual property involved. But also, as we mentioned earlier, in cases where there involves space, equipment, or services. And in some of these cases, I mean, it can be done, but again, a management plan must be developed. And then the part of the management plan could include agreements, like, for example, if somebody wants to use some of our classrooms, as long as there is some kind of facilities agreement, it can be done. Here, so again, continue with evaluating whether there is a conflict. We need to take into account, again, like who is involved in those activities. In some cases, if there is like a mentor or supervisory relationship related to the activity, again, a management plan must be developed. And here, as part of the management plan, is going to include details about that relationship and the expectations between the person who is being supervised and the supervisor. And there are cases where the covered individuals may engage with other institutions. And in those cases, as a unit executive officer, you need to see how much effort is being spent at UIS compared to that outside appointment. And also you need to consider whether there's an agreement or a contract in place with that particular institution. And all of this documentation needs to be included in the system when you as an executive officer approves the request. Here are an additional example of when you have to evaluate whether there's a conflict of interest is, for example, if a a sponsor is a particular company, for example, is giving money to an individual's for an individual to conduct their research. So again, it could be a perceived conflict of interest, or could be a conflict of interest. For example, if a chemical company says, okay, so it's for me, I'm going to give you this money to study this compound that eliminates migraines, and then I get pressure as a researcher to say, yeah, the compound actually cures migraines or whatever. Of course, there's an obvious conflict of interest. So just kind of in general, if there's such a type of relationship, it is important to have research agreement and agreements in place, as well as other types of agreements depending on the nature of this relationship. And a similar thing is when involves purchases again. So have to, well, for one thing, we have to follow the state procurement guidelines, and again document everything that we have available, such as any contracts, agreements, and of course a conflict of management plan. The other important thing as we engage with university, with external activities rather, is kind of consider how the public will view that particular activity. So if we think that it's going to be perceived in a negative way, yeah, again, we will have to develop a very detailed management plan. So as you know, higher ed is under scrutiny, so we need to be very careful about some cases. It's just a perceived conflict of interest. It may not be, but in case it is, we have to be really careful in terms of making sure we follow the procedures to ensure that we are in agreement with all the policies and guidelines. So here is like just kind of recapping what the cover individual and you as a supervisor or unit executive officer should do is, of course, that draft a management plan, and you will need to appoint an oversight committee, and also how you're going to follow up with that oversight committee. Just basically propose a whole plan. When is it going to be reviewed and what triggers what? And all of this has to be approved. And of course, you have to monitor that there is compliance. So just kind of here again, just kind of a recap of the whole process. So the unit executive officers are the ones who evaluate at the first level of review. Like for example, if you are a department chair, a college director, so you're going to be evaluating the disclosures of those people, and you're responsible for determining whether you approve or not. If you think that is a kind of tricky conflict of interest, or whether it's a conflict of interest, then you have to develop a management plan. In those cases where some individuals have multiple appointments, so the home department must review that RNUA first and then route it to the second department where the appointment is in place. And here, just as a reminder, if you are a dean, then you're going to be reviewing the disclosures from department heads. And then when there are, depending on the structure, I know we have several structures at UIS, but for example, if a school director finds that one of their covered individuals have a conflict of commitment, they will have to route that RNUA to the dean again, so that they can assess and determine whether that is approved or not. And that's what we call sometimes the second level of review. So initially the direct unit executive officers reviews the disclosure, And in some cases, it could be kind of forwarded to a second level, which could be depending on how your unit is structured. It could be your dean or could be the provost. So here is just kind of again a recap, like for department heads, they're going to be reviewed by the dean. And again, the dean can approve or just start working on a management plan. Oops. So yeah, I think that's all of what we have. Here are a couple of resources. There is a link to the reviewer's guide. And also, if you feel like you're in a situation where you need to develop a management plan, the website included here has good templates or examples and more information about how to develop that management plan. And if you have additional questions, feel free to contact us and then we can discuss a particular situation and or just kind of share with you any other resources that you may need. That's all I have. Are there any questions? I guess there's silence. I guess no questions. All right. Okay. Well, thank you for coming. And just remember that we are offering workshops every week. And tomorrow there's an IRE workshop. So you are welcome to come. Bye.